Walking around.
Do you mean your
Yeah,
vaccine?
vaccination. I
Oh,
had my
great.
flu
You're now
shot too.
live.
Okay. So they put 300 people through the Barry Auditorium today.
Get your diploma in 2 weeks.
Yeah. So, okay, we're going back into session. This is Senate Finance. As I just said, I'm back from my flu shot. And we've got this on S33 for discussion on the tax base increment finance, the mini TIFs. And Megan Sullivan is here, and in the rush to get out the bills we knew we needed to get out yesterday, she got kind of shortchanged, plus she got cut off, and it's hard to concentrate in the orthodontist office, saying there's some cruel and unusual punishment going on here. I pulled into the hospital parking lot to vote this morning. I found out I can get Zoom on my phone. I'm not sure that's a really good thing to know. But we are back, and Megan, there were some, I guess, questions about protections, other questions about the size of municipalities. You know, if you're talking about a town with 1,000 or less people, you're talking about a town with 10,000 people. That's a bigger tax base, and maybe they could afford to do their own septic system. And I'm, you know, and there is the risk to the ed fund. And I'm concerned that a town could put in a septic system or run their water and sewer lines, a little town like Shelburne, run their water and sewer lines out a road. Then a developer can come in and put up quite a few $1 million worth of housing. And that housing, if it's in their district, would be off the tax rolls. And that concerns me. And
Great. Okay, Megan Sullivan, Executive Director of the Vermont Economic Progress Council. So there are some changes that we've made between the project-based TIF program and the TIF district program. I can speak first to the issue of boundaries. The boundaries in a TIF district can be hundreds of parcels. You know, we see a large swath of area that says any parcel within this boundary is included in your TIF district. That is part of what makes the TIF district program very complicated. And part of what we were looking to find an alternative to in order to make this project-based TIF program more accessible to smaller communities. And part of why this is really more about gap financing, you know, finding that the piece where, you know, we can't find the funds to be able to repay this part of the debt, and using TIF as bridging that gap by saying that instead of hundreds of parcels, your entire village center, your entire designated downtown, what you're going to do is we're going to look at the specific parcels that you're expecting redevelopment on. So in Westford's case, it's the 7 parcels that they're saying these are the ones where we're expecting housing developments to come online because of the conversations we've had with prospective developers and landowners, if we were to get this system in place. Now, with that system, there may be an increase in interest from other developers, which would be great to say not only are those 7 parcels now going to see benefit, but parcels outside of that are going to benefit. And those, unlike the TIF district program with the larger boundary, that increment isn't going to go to the TIF debt financing. That'll go directly to the taxing authorities. But it's going to be the increment from those parcels that will be analyzed to make sure that there is viability in what a town is projecting and what the debt service needs to be.
Senator Bray.
Thank you. I was trying to just make sure, so my understanding, I don't know exactly how, on Senator Cummings' hypothetical, might the only piece of the TIF project be the sewer and water line extensions as opposed to adjoining properties? Or, I thought it was more infrastructure, particular infrastructure oriented as opposed to, well, how big could it be? For instance, in Middlebury, I've heard it's related to developing parking as part of a development, but my impression was it didn't include the new buildings. So I don't know where the lines are.
Yeah, so the public infrastructure improvement would be the the extension of wastewater into the village center, or a public parking structure, or surface parking. And having that public infrastructure improvement allows private development to occur that otherwise wouldn't occur, whether it's in the case of parking, whether it's housing or commercial uses that say, we have to have parking in order to have use. Or, and if we're going to put in a mixed use building on this street, we need to have parking, or we need to have sidewalks and lighting so that people can come and go here. If we don't have those public amenities, this is not where we're going to build. Or either we're not going to build, or there's a really nice green field over there that we could put a big building and a big parking lot easily. So it's about that smart growth, but saying the public amenities that need to coordinate in order to allow for private development.
Okay. So
Right, but public amenities don't pay taxes.
Right.
Except parking garages, we learned last year. So you have to take in the building, because the building is what's going to pay taxes.
Yeah, so it would be the parcel that the building is on that would be the incremental revenue, or a portion of that incremental revenue would be used for repayment of the debt service. But it would be upon application where the community would say, these are the redevelopment opportunities that we see, the private development opportunities that we either have development agreements on, have progressive conversations with the developers on, that we want to use for that debt service. It's not the larger boundary, as Senator Cummings was saying, where there may be an unexpected development that occurs down the line. That would not be captured in the increment. It's really just from those pieces of development that are expected at the time of application. And that's how viability is checked on. What is that increment expected to be? What is the debt service based on how much money you need to bond for going to be, and do those align? And if they don't align, then they're either going to be denied, or at least asked to go back to the drawing board and look for additional funding.
So just to make it concrete, I'm thinking, so in Middlebury's case, there's an area there's been recent construction along the river. And as I understand it, in order to support adjacent development, they're trying to turn a river that's basically had the town sort of turned its back on, turned it into a feature. So they need parking, no surprise. And as I understand it, the TIF project is the parking. And so you're saying it would also be I think there are two developers planning adjacent construction to help develop that space. So if this is a district, it's really the parking lot plus the two buildings. And it's the income off what would have been tax. Well, it's tax, but it's redirected, a portion of which helps pay the loan, and then a smaller portion then goes to the ed fund than would otherwise gone. But it's So it's on the total cost of the project.
That to me sounds like a TIF. When this was first presented, we had Westford, which has how many people, Senator Sorokin? 1,000, less than 1,000?
About 1,000, I think. yeah.
About 1,000. And now we're in to Middlebury, redeveloping their riverfront district with a TIF to build a parking garage. That's, and I'm, this is expanding as it, to me, there's just a difference between a mound septic system in Westford and a parking garage for two major developers. And I'm not sure there isn't anything that says you have to put affordable housing at the end of that water and sewer line. That it may just be those 3 parcels or 5 parcels, but you could put $1 million house on each one of those parcels.
Can I
And
just
that's
say something?
concerning.
I just want to, sorry to interrupt. I just want to make sure. I don't know the Middlebury project well. I don't think it's a parking garage. I think it's open parking, but whatever. I don't want to speak on behalf of
Yeah,
that. I
right.
just had casual conversations about, well, what's going to happen? And I heard parking plus a new building alongside the riverfront. So
I'm just concerned that we started talking about very small towns and suddenly we're talking about, for Vermont, large towns. Middlebury in Vermont is a big town. Senator Hardy and then Senator Pearson.
Well, first of all, Westford is 2,100 people. I just looked it up, but
I know how you're that fast or can do 5 things at once.
I have 2 screens, I'm getting practiced at this after a year of doing it. But I'm looking at the bill, and the bill actually has a lot of language that specifies what kind of project it can be and what the criteria are. And just for the record, I told Senator Sorokin this earlier. I had several conversations yesterday. Lots of people after I said, I'm uncomfortable with this. What do you know? I say it on YouTube and all these people are like, let me tell you what I know, including Megan. Thank you for your call. Had a kind of a busy 24 hours, so I wasn't able to call you back. But so just in looking at the language, there are very specific criteria that the projects would have to do, and the kinds of things that they have to be eligible for. And part of it is that has to have a public purpose. And then it lists a couple of things. I'm trying to find the actual part.
Maybe Becky is here.
Yeah, I mean, Becky might be able to walk through. So there are certain
Walk us
criteria
through.
and there are
Because I-
limits. And I wonder if Becky or Megan, I'm not sure which one, could speak specifically and explain the impact or not impact, whatever it is, on the ed fund, and how that works. Essentially, I've heard
Yeah.
different numbers thrown around, and I'd sort of like to get that pinned down a little bit more. So I don't know which one of you wants to answer those 2 questions: the criteria for types of projects, and then the impact on the ed fund.
Becky, can you walk us through the bill at the 10-foot level and help us just, fairly detailed so we can understand what the criteria are, because we've been talking in descriptions and the descriptions keep getting broader. And I think it might be better if we saw what the language actually says. So if you can put it up.
Yeah, sure. So I'm just gonna get it up real quickly. So I can just point you to the approval process section of the bill, which has that, those criteria.
Well, now I think it would be good to walk through the bill if you've got the time.
Sure.
Madam Chair, while we're switching over to that, can I ask a quick question on the way there?
Yeah.
So I understand, what puzzles me is sometimes when I talk to people, they talk about, sort of like damage to the ed fund. But all I can see ever is that the ed fund gets new revenue, but less new revenue than it would have with ordinary development. So it seems like diminished benefit, but still benefit. And am I missing something?
If I could share a graphic at some point that I think helps visualize how it works,
Yeah.
That would be great.
I think it said 85% of the increased value or appraised value would go to pay the debt service. And then there was the town, or was it 85% of, no, 85% of the value would go to pay the debt service from the schools. There's the school and the
It would
municipal.
be at least 85% of the municipal increment
Okay,
would go to finance the debt, and no more than 70% of the education fund increment would go to service the debt. The entire original taxable value, the base taxable value, will continue to go to the taxing authorities, as well as that portion of the incremental revenues. So assuming that there would be some amount of growth in the grand list during that time, that portion of the incremental funds is why that's included, that extra 30%. So it doesn't assume an all or nothing by having it be the original taxable value plus the 30%.
and that's very similar. You might have
It's
played
the
with the
same as in
number.
the district program. Yep.
Is in the TIF district.
Megan, is your thing on our website?
It is. Yeah.
What's it called?
It's called, well, the title I had for it, I haven't looked to see what it is there, but S33 Megan Sullivan Revitalizing Vermont's Rural Community Centers. And it's at the bottom of the second page.
Okay, Becky,
Okay.
I think we can move along from just clarifying which towns are been approved for TIFs. And at some point, we had talked about putting the TIF clarification language that we got to the Senate floor the day we went home last year on here, because it is still unclear for the towns that are in the process of doing that, and it's in this bill, so it's going to be germane, I would think, but let's get to the new part. All right, this is the new section, right? All right. Okay, Becky, can you walk us through?
Talking, didn't realize I was on mute, sorry. Um,
Another part of the glories of Zoom.
Yeah, so I was saying that section 3 is where the pilot program starts. I think I also said my name for the record, which was not on the record. So Becky Wasserman, Legislative Counsel. So subsection A is the definition section. I did go through these last time. I can highlight some of the differences here. These are mostly the same from what's in statute right now for the TIF districts, but I can highlight a couple of the differences, which
Is the coordinating agency different?
I believe that's the same definition.
Okay, it's the same definition, all right.
Yeah. So there's a difference in the definition of financing on page 4, starting on, I believe it's line 16 with respect to the bond anticipation notes, that those may be used as a method of financing and qualify as a municipality's first incurrence of debt, but they have to be used during the 3rd or 6th year that a municipality may incur debt, and that they have to incur all permanent financing not more than 1 year after issuing the bond anticipation note. This was
That-
what you discussed last year for TIF.
Yeah,
districts.
that's what I thought. So that is one of those clarifying languages.
Yes.
And can we make sure that shows up in the TIF statute as well? the big TIF?
I could add that to this bill in a different section,
Okay,
if that's what the committee would like. Page 5, the definition of improvements, on line 4. This is different from TIF districts, also discussed last year in a TIF district bill, was that improvements means the funding of debt service interest payments for a period of up to 5 years, beginning on the date on which the first debt is incurred. So I can also add that in to an amendment to make that for TIF districts, if that is what the committee would like to do.
is transportation? I mean, transportation could mean a bus line, right? As opposed to road improvements. Transportation
Well-
infrastructure would be road improvements. Transportation could be setting up a bus system.
Well, this is referencing the installation, new construction, or reconstruction of infrastructure. So I think the transportation here is referencing transportation infrastructure. So a road,
Okay.
for example.
And this is
And-
this matches the TIF district definition up
Okay.
until the point of improvements also means.
Can I, a quick
Yes,
question? on the
Senator Bray,
timing?
yep.
For a period of up to 5 years, that's the total period of debt for the, there's long,
No, that is the that is saying that you can use the proceeds. If you incur debt, you can use the proceeds to pay for of that bond, to pay for the interest payments on your debt only for the first 5 years.
Okay.
You can't do it for a longer period. This was an issue that came up with some of the TIF districts doing this, and it was raised in an auditor's report last year about whether the statute was clear that this was a mechanism that could be used. So it was raised last year to put it in statute to clarify that it could. There was some, I guess, restriction put around it about putting the 5-year limit on it for the amount of time that you could do this.
okay,
This is where they use bonded money to pay the debt service on their bond, which I gather I know it was fairly common practice because the improvement, which was going to add to the tax base, didn't get out of the ground. You have to start paying before you've got a building
Right.
or something there to tax. And this was one of the issues that came up last year.
so it's principal plus interest, but just for the first 5 years, and then after principal, you're paying down the, well, actually, sorry, let me rephrase that, that's confusing.
It's
You
interesting.
can finance your interest in the beginning, but you can't for the long haul.
Right.
For the long haul, you should be using your incremental revenues to make that
Got it.
payment.
Thank
But
you.
there's a certain number of years where there won't be incremental revenue. And this says you can borrow the money and then pay it back to the organization you borrowed it from in interest, and then you switch over. Okay,
So line 11, nexus, that is also a different definition specific to the TIF projects. So that is referencing that there has to be a relationship between what your improvements you're doing and the development in the project zone, which is for the TIF projects, it's defined, but it's essentially the sort of area in which that's going to be impacted by improvements being made. This is a little bit of a different concept from the TIF districts, which has, I think as Megan mentioned before, it could have, hundreds of parcels in a boundary line that creates that district. So this is creating essentially the same idea of what parcels is this project impacting, and how can you measure that? And so it's creating a TIF project zone.
For that, on number 6, go back up. Yeah, municipality. This is where I think I'd like to put a fence around this. This was presented as something for small communities. A city is not a small community. So do a town or incorporated village, I think would
Not that I've spoken to them about this, but I think Virgins is considered a very small city.
One
Just
square.
as
yeah,
mile.
it is.
Well,
As a
city,
point.
smallest in the US, is it?
It's
Yes.
the little city. You're right.
So,
Yeah,
Madam,
well,
Madam
unintended.
Madam Chair, could help me understand that, because you've spent quite a bunch of time talking about how you're worried about the very smallest towns'
right.
ability to manage this. So here you're suggesting that it should only be the very smallest towns. What's going on here? I'm not understanding.
Okay, what I'm saying is when this was presented to us last year, it was presented as this was a way to help towns who had too small a tax base to put in something as basic as a septic system, not a water filtration plant, wastewater plant, a basic hole in the ground septic tank.
So I think-
But by this year, we're talking about Middlebury, Virgins. Under this definition, the city of Burlington, who already has 2 TIF districts,
Well, they're
could
excluded
apply.
else-
And
they're
I'm
excluded elsewhere,
trying to
though.
limit it to small towns.
So Burlington could not apply because anyone
Why?
with a TIF district could not apply for a project. So Burlington would not be eligible to apply to this program until they retired their TIF
it's not
in
the-
2035.
But what
I
I'm saying
think-
is,
Right.
that's
so
not how this was presented to us
So,
originally.
I think there's the small change is the impact of COVID-19 has had on all of Vermont communities. And a community like Middlebury, at this point, with the disruption that has been caused by COVID-19, may be able to consider doing one project. And that one project, if it is my husband used to be the library director in Middlebury, so if it's that parking lot that I'm thinking of, has been in the town wish list of we need to try and get this done forever, and they haven't been able to do it. Having one project, I think, is
I get you
another
saying.
important piece of this, that a district is 10 years worth of projects throughout a large boundary. So while I think our intention is really to look at what are the small community needs, if a community like Middlebury can come in and make a solid case that they have a but for one project, I think it's something that we should consider. But their but for one project is going to be different than Westford's but for one project, because they do have a larger tax base to pull from. So, I think there are guardrails in place with viability and with that check on the but for that will help control this, so that it's not just large communities that are participating, that it will largely be our smaller communities that have had projects they have not been able to get across the finish line for years and years because of that inability to finance the debt. But if there are some of our larger communities who don't, for one reason or another, can't think about a TIF district with 10 years of projects throughout a larger boundary area and have one project that could be meaningful and can meet the but for, that's something we could still consider.
Okay, Senator McDonald.
Madam-
I do see your hand, Senator.
It's okay, Madam Chair, I'm gonna go on a bit of length here, but the challenge, the problem we're having to solve is created by the change that we have made in TIFs. A TIF district is established by drawing a line around the area of a town where the town wished to be able to not pay property taxes for the operation of the town, but to pay property taxes to pay off a TIF district's loan or bonding. And we didn't have discussions about whether they were going to build a roller coaster in there or a parking garage or anything, because it was their own money. And if the bonding company looked at the proposal and said, this makes sense, they were good to go. So why are we having this discussion? We're having this discussion because now that the towns are no longer obliged to use their own money, and they get it from the ed fund to subsidize it, we are suddenly in the position of deciding whether it's worthwhile or whether the other towns think that the proposal is meritorious, and we discuss whether housing is appropriate or this or chicken farms. That's because these TIFs are using other people's money. The prohibition against Burlington about having another TIF before they paid it off really wouldn't be the state's business or the legislature's prerogative to deal with, because if the bonding companies were afraid they weren't going to pay it off, Burlington wouldn't be loaned the money. This is I think what some of my colleagues would say on other search situations, a creeping problem when you are funding things that are inappropriate. Towns shouldn't be buying Cadillacs with TIF money. They shouldn't be buying potato chips with TIF money, and they shouldn't be buying beer with TIF money. And under the old TIF law, no bonding company would let them do that. Now that we're the ones that have to sit in here and pick and choose over whether it's beer, potato chips, and Cadillacs. And that's why the TIF thing has gone awry in using the ed fund as a state bank, Madam Chair. That's why we're having this discussion today. And thank you for taking my description of the problem we're trying to solve.
Okay, Senator Brock.
I don't know if I agree with my colleague's contention. I don't think that's what's happening at all. I think what we're doing here is we are effectively using the small TIF program for small projects. And we have the group that is charged with evaluating these projects to take into consideration the credit evaluation that goes along with it, so that we don't allow small communities to get out beyond their ability to pay these things off. The notion, and we use Westford as an example. I'm sure there are other towns that are going to come up, but these, of course, do get evaluated on a case-by-case basis as to whether or not it's reasonable and whether or not there's going to be sufficient money to be able to satisfy the debt. And in the event that the debt is not satisfied, and in most cases, if it's not, it would at least be partially satisfied, even if we consider worst case situations, that the municipality has signed effectively to be on the hook as the guarantor. Now, admittedly, I don't think what we want to see is to get to the point in which we take the town of Westford and put it up on the bankruptcy court steps and sell it off in order to pay the debt. And I don't think that's going to happen. I think that by carefully evaluating the proposals as they come along, that we can make intelligent investments. But these are investments that aren't going to be made otherwise because the credit markets don't exist to do it.
Madam Chair,
Yes,
the,
Senator.
the Senator Brock is correct. Except that the towns, the bonds people, the ones that are that have to take the loss. And in this case, the Ed fund is picking up a tab for a chunk of it. And that's why we're having this discussion, because we are now, the Ed fund is is losing the money to produce these things, and we're not, if not the guarantor, we got skin in the game. That's why we're have to take these things piecemeal. That's I don't disagree with the problems that small towns have, but when you're spending other people's money, it's a different ball game, and we're trying to adjust to that new ball game on the fly, town by town, whether it's Cadillac, Lincoln, or Imperial, and that's what happens when you start widening this pool. Thank you.
Okay.
Madam Chair, I still don't see how we're saying that the education fund is picking up these losses. Maybe I'm missing something in the discussion.
This
We're
is
told
the
that
old,
we
no,
wouldn't
this
be
is
done.
the,
This would not take place if the education fund wasn't the mechanism for making it work. TIFs were where towns and municipalities drew a line around something, and they required a law change because the law said that property taxes had to be used in a relatively equal basis. And doing what TIFs proposed to do was not legal. So we changed the law to make it legal within the town. We didn't change until recently. We didn't change it to have it overflow into all sorts of areas where it's no longer what was used to be called a TIF and is still a TIF in other states.
okay.
Well, Jeopardy, though.
This is getting down to the argument of, would the development occur without the TIF? And the
Obviously not.
argument for the big TIFs is yes. The argument was the St. Albans Hotel. It could have gone somewhere else out along the interstate in a cornfield. That's an ongoing, argument. You either believe it or you don't. And I'm not going there. I think this is a proposal to allow smaller communities to use a smaller version of a TIF. My concern is it is not limited to smaller communities and larger communities, because they do have finance directors and offices and city, professional town and city managers have an advantage over the little ones. I want to make sure, I would feel much more comfortable if the word city came out of municipality, because city by definition is larger. It has an infrastructure. Virgins might be the exception. But I don't want to find towns using the Ed fund to finance small projects when they could get the votes to do larger ones. Or perhaps, the way it goes now is, the developer shares in some of the cost. And I'm trying to find a balance here.
Well, would it make sense and would it be possible to use something like a population limit?
That could work. Senator
Hmm.
Hardy,
To do what?
to limit the size. Okay, so Senator Hardy's got the floor.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. I had my hand up for a while, so now everything's shifted as to what I wanted to say. But I was actually going to ask Senator Brock what he thought, because you've been quiet and I know you have experience in this area. So thank you for speaking up. That was helpful, what you said, helpful to me anyway. Megan's chart about what is very helpful if you haven't looked at it, about the sort of impact or non-impact on the education fund. That helped me to understand it. So, you know, prior to looking at that and really thinking and hearing from other people, my impression was that there was actually money being taken from the ed fund to help fund these projects, and that is not the case. And that's really clear. So thank you for that. The visual and the color coding is lovely. But I'm wondering, you know, and I also, first of all, we never let Becky finish going through the draft because she
Right,
was
we're
just
going
about
back.
to get to this part that talks about the criteria, which were helpful to me to read again. And finally, you know, my impression of what mini TIF meant before, what people have been using that word. I don't think it's actually in the draft, but people were saying mini TIF. And I was thinking it was a TIF for a mini place, like a little town. And it's actually just a smaller project. So I think that's actually helpful in defining it, and that it's not going to be used for these huge projects. It's going to be used for these smaller, more tight projects that fit the criteria that Becky was going to go through. So could we all let her finish that before we all
Yes.
start talking again?
Okay, I can go through that. So I just, on the point of the smaller projects, the definition of project, I have up here on lines 18 to 21. So just to point out that the total debt ceiling for a project is $5 million. So that is a cap on the amount of the project. There are the criteria for a project is that it has to clearly require substantial public investment over and above the normal municipal operating or bonded debt expenditures. It can only include public improvements that are integral to the expected private development, and it has to meet one of the following 4 criteria. So these are that it includes new or rehabilitated affordable housing, that it affects the remediation and redevelopment of a brownfield located within the district. The development will include at least one entirely new business or business operation or expansion of an existing business within the project, and will provide new quality full-time jobs that meet or exceed the prevailing wage as reported by the Department of Labor for that region. And finally, the development will enhance transportation by creating improved traffic patterns and flow, or creating or improving public transportation systems. I think it might be helpful to also go through in the bill where the VEPC, how VEPC approves the application. So this is in.
We're going to have to move on because we're running out of time.
So I'll just highlight some of these. So I believe there are some. So the application is looked at to 1A on line 16 is that but for test that the proposed development would not have occurred as proposed in the application, or would be significantly different or less desirable, but for the utilization of the incremental tax revenues. And then they also look at things such as if additional time would be needed to complete the proposed development, or additional cost if the project were to proceed without education property tax increment financing, how the proposed project components and size would differ without that increment financing, additional revenue expected to be generated as a result of the project. And then it looks at the amount of revenue paid to the ed fund and to the municipality. And so I think this was one of the questions, losing track of days, Tuesday, about how VEPC kind of determines that the proposal will be able to meet the requirements that it will be able to pay for itself. And this is what
That's great.
the review process that they go through to make that determination.
If I may, I would just say that the criteria that we went through, I think, are really critical in this. So the example that was given, that $1 million luxury homes or condos would be put up, and that could use TIF financing for the public parking, would not be allowed. You know, that it has to meet one of those 4 criteria, and those are criteria that the legislature put in place for the TIF district program to say that these are statewide priorities. So if you want to use tax increment financing, your project has to meet one of these statewide priorities in order to use that. So there are those guardrails in place on, you know, it couldn't just be luxury condos or Cadillac. To be clear, I don't think anyone's ever purchased a Cadillac or beer or chips with TIF, but
That's just his allegorical way of speaking. Okay. Okay.
and I
So-
did post or sent to the committee, and I believe Faith has posted an early draft proposal of what an application would look like. So the committee could get an idea of not just, you know, what's in the bill, but what, based on that bill, what an application for this program would entail. Obviously, that is in very early draft form, but I wanted to, you know, be able to present that piece so you could really see the types of questions we'd be asking.
Okay. I thought the percentage was set in statute for the ed fund in the municipality. Is this the actual amount you estimate will be paid?
Oh,
No, it was back there, Becky.
oh, I was going to point out that the amount that they can use of the increment is set in the language here.
Yeah,
For up to 70% of the education tax increment can be retained for 20 years. And then for the municipal, it's 85% on line 20. And that is set in statute for districts. And this is sort of mirrors what is available. But the review process that you were looking at, I think part of what VEPSI is reviewing is what is the impact of retaining that increment in terms of the revenues that go to the ed fund and that are paid to the municipality, such that they could pay for the project.
Right, so that's saying if a community says we need to borrow the full 5 million, but then they show based on the expected development, private developments, they're only going to get $3 million worth of increment in that 20 years. That is not going to be a viable project. That's where we're looking and saying, you know, you need to either look at other granting sources or go back to the drawing board, because based on that $3 million of available increment that includes education fund increment, the percentage of education fund increment, the percentage of municipal increment, to pay for principal, interest, and related costs, you know, you have to show that there's viability there.
Senator Brock, your hand's up. Is that a new hand or an
No,
old hand?
that's my old hand just hanging
That's your
around.
old hand, okay.
I have my hand up, Madam Chair.
Okay, Senator Sirotkin, I can't hear,
See?
I can see 2 of you and Megan, so just holler.
So I just want to be very brief. In my time on finance and in economic development, I've heard a lot of good things about TIFs. And what I did hear is that this kind of creative financing was not available to smaller communities who didn't have the staff to go through the complicated process. So when this idea came forward, we were very enthusiastic about it. I guess I just want to pick up on what Senator Brock was saying, because I also disagree with my friend Senator McDonald. He said, this is where TIFs have gone awry. I haven't heard of an example of where a TIF has gone awry. Can somebody give me one?
No, I don't think we're going, this is a basic, whether you believe in the but-for TIFs or not. And
Madam Chair,
I've said last year, this is like a tenet of your religion. You either believe it or you don't.
well, thank you, because now I know that you won't suppress my religion when I speak. Madam Chair, to
Yes.
Senator Sorokin's question. When TIFs were created, they were within municipalities, and municipalities, when they did and went into doing TIFs, it was their money and it was approved by bonding, and they were not released. Municipalities were not released from education law responsibilities.
You're talking about before Act 60.
I'm talking about TIFs.
Yeah, but
Before Act
TIFs
60.
that before
And-
Act 60, it was just the local taxes that were affected.
And the state aid to education formula was affected, and towns were not able to take their TIF revenues and set them aside so as to gain an advantage in the state funding formula. They could not use the TIF money to both build the project and avoid and change the state aid to education formula to help promote the TIFs. They could not unload their
Okay.
education things outside the district. And when Act 60 passed, the legislature has said, we will now allow you to use the ed fund to subsidize and to not be required, according to law, to do what other towns have to do. And once you do that, then the notion of TIFs becomes, well, if you can get the state to allow the ed fund to subsidize it, we should line up on that train and seek X, Y, and Z, which puts the state in the position of deciding what this town wants X, that one wants Y, and the next one wants Z. And we're now picking towns as to which one will be able to use the ed fund as a subsidy and not participate like other towns. That is it's providing, favoritism, size matters. Big towns have more oomph, as the chair has described. They have the accountants to do it. But the fundamental thing is that they're getting out of ed fund contributions to a degree that allows them gives them a subsidy to do what's being proposed. Therefore, we are scrutinizing with an eagle eye and picking and choosing winners, whereas previously the bond sellers simply looked at it and says, yes, we'll get our money back. They were the ones that made the decision. So I wouldn't be repeating this if some of the newer senators had said they don't understand what the issue is or what the difference is. That's the difference we're dealing with. And it will continue to be in this giving, use the word pork, to some towns that we wouldn't give to other towns based on the merits of their proposal or the imagination of their citizens or their consultants.
Okay.
Madam Chair, I have a question.
Yes,
What?
is that Senator Pearson?
Yes, it is.
Okay, if you speak,
Madam
I
Chair,
think
do
you'll
you want
pop
me
up
to
over
take
here.
the screen share down?
Yeah, I think at this point.
So I don't, I don't have the experience that some of you have with TIFs, and I don't sort of like TIFs, if I'm starting from scratch. But I have gone hunting to understand how TIFs harm the ed fund, as Senator McDonald keeps asserting. And I haven't found evidence of that. I do think it's more appropriate to say the ed fund backs the loan, but the ed fund is guaranteed its static level of revenue. And well, either it does or it doesn't. The law suggests that it does. So if you-
70%, they get 70%, not 100% of what they're supposed to
That's
get.
No,
not
no,
true.
no.
That
No,
is
no,
not
this is
true.
all based on whether or not you assume the development would take place without a TIF.
Oh, once you open that door, you can do any darn thing you please.
No. Let's
No.
be clear. I feel like we keep expressing opinions. We should be talking about facts. So, can we please have the facts on what exactly is the impact on the ed fund compared to a district that's not doing development and a district that is entertaining one of these, either the current TIF structure or one of these small TIFs? What is the impact on the ed fund?
Today or beforehand?
No, I don't
Can
know
we
that
hear
we're
from-
asking you.
From Graham, please. I'd like to hear from JFO.
We can ask Graham to come in.
He's
There
here.
are-
Who's here?
Well,
He's
we don't
here.
have a mini TIF. He's here. Good.
He's here.
Well,
Because there is a report
we have a structure.
To the emergency board annually on the impact of foregone revenue from TIFs. Those are big TIFs. But that is a public record, and Graham, I'll have you out there.
For the record, I'm Graham Campbell from the Joint Fiscal Office. I just wanted to chime in with Senator Pearson. I think Senator Cummings is right. It really just depends on what you believe would have happened outside the TIF district, or if TIF hadn't been put in place. So if you imagine you have the same area, right? The same geographic area. And under one scenario, that TIF district receives, it's a TIF district. It's established as a TIF district. And then stuff gets built up. 70% of the dollars from that increment get used to pay back the bonds. Now imagine a different scenario where that same amount of building happens, but you didn't establish a TIF district. What happens is that the ed fund would get 100% of that development. And so it really boils down to what you truly believe it would happen without the TIF district. Because if the same thing were to happen under the TIF district scenario relative to the no TIF district scenario, then the ed fund is losing out 70%. But if you don't believe that, then the ed fund is getting, an extra 30%, because without the TIF, nothing would have happened.
Okay, thank you. So,
Right. Correct.
So, but it's not right. So it depends on whether or not you believe that these would have happened anyway.
Right.
And in today's examples, we've heard from Middlebury that's been clawing at this development for a long time, hasn't happened. And Westford has similarly stated that they have been trying to do their septic and it has not happened. So the way I think about it is maybe an imperfect proposition, but we have extended them to plenty of towns. It has resulted in development that generally it is working as designed, whether or not it's fair or smart, it is working as designed. And here we're talking about extending a similar strategy to small towns. And we have often spoken to the availability for sophisticated tools for the big cities. And I guess I don't understand why we would, if given the opportunity, extend a similar benefit, a related corollary benefit to smaller communities. That seems straightforward. If we want to talk about should we have ever had TIFs or not, maybe I would change my mind. But if we have,
That's not the question.
well, right, it is not the question. To me, the question is, should we also allow the small communities to play with this tool that we have afforded big communities? That's a different question to me, and I think we should.
Madam Chair, I'll make a short statement and then I will be silent for the rest of this discussion.
Okay, Senator.
The subsidy from the Ed Fund, which brings this to us, is a source, makes the Ed Fund a source of money to do this. It is interesting that we're unwilling to subsidize towns out of the cities, out of the general fund. We choose to do it out of the Ed Fund. And if that's a decision that is made, that's happens. But when we as members of the legislature say it's not a subsidy, and when we know darn well that if it came out of the same amount of money to subsidize these projects came out of the general fund, people would be screaming bloody murder because it's a subsidy. The Ed Fund's being used as a bank. We ought to say that. We ought to fess up to it, and then outvote me. But don't claim it's not taking place. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm done.
But
Is what do we call those, Graham? A tax. We don't collect it, therefore,
Sure.
yeah. And we do get this reported in there. What I would like to do in the interest of moving this forward is find a population number, if not the name city, to limit this to, because I don't want the city of Montpelier or the city of anywhere to take up the available money and leave this. If we want this for small towns, I think we should limit it to small towns. And if
Montpelier is excluded because they have a TIF. That the language is very clear. If you have a TIF,
yes,
you
no,
can't-
I'm talking about other cities of similar size who have the staff and the training to get into line first. If the committee doesn't, and if you want to do this, that's fine. The other thing I would like to do, since this is a pilot project, 15 is a large number of pilots. Usually pilots are something like 5 in 5 years. If it's going well, then we can expand it next year. This is the friendly committee. I am trying to get something that has a chance of making it through. And I want to have something that is limited enough, that is a true pilot, that will make it through both appropriations and ways and means. Because if we send in something that's too big, it will die.
Madam Chair, I'm
Yes.
sorry, I am scheduled in another committee, so I do have to go now, but I can
Okay.
listen to whatever the committee decides they'd like
Okay.
to change it to. I just want to highlight that Senate Economic Development had limited it to 5 years, and there is an error in the current language that says it's
Right,
6
5 years,
so-
but 15 projects in
That's-
5 years is
right.
a
So
lot.
I will change whatever amendment is made. I can change it
Yeah,
back to
no,
5 years.
5 or 6. It's the 15 that seems like a lot. Senator Brock.
I would suggest, Madam Chair, that in order to get us moving here, that perhaps if we were able to scale back the number of projects to something that everybody would feel a bit more comfortable with, that might be useful. If we could get, let's say, somewhere between the two figures, we have 5 and 15, if we get to, say 9, something like that. That makes it a bit more reasonable and comfortable for everybody to be comfortable with. And I would add to Senator McDonald's comment about the religion of either believing him or not.
That was mine.
There is a little bit more to it than that. And I've always been a big critic of but-for tests. And I mean, I have for years since I was state auditor, because I recognize the problems that can create. And what's key here is the effectiveness of the screening process that VEPSI puts in place, that that validates that it's a reasonable project and it makes sense. And then we kind of stand back as I think the VEPSI board has to do, particularly in these smaller things, and apply just a modicum of common sense. If you believe, take Westford, for example, that Bill Gates is going to come along and trip over it and discover it and give them $3 or $4 million to build a sewer system, then we don't need TIFs. On the other hand, when you look at that sewer system being built 5 years from now, you ask yourself, what else could have happened that would have caused that sewer system to build itself, were it not for that infusion of money, because it commercially made no sense to do it based on the owner of that particular property. I look at the same time on the larger scale of what happened in St. Albans, where I look at that community 15 years ago and I look at the development that's occurred now, principally as a result of TIF money. And I cannot believe that it would have happened in any other way or from any other funding source that I know of if it were not simply, again, religion by the stroke of Zeus.
My comment about religion is you're not going to change anyone's belief structure by argument. Okay, Senator Bray.
So I just would like to learn more about we have a project cap, right, of $5 million in the bill. And I'm just wondering where that number comes from. It seems like a pretty modest amount. I don't know if that's the municipal infrastructure piece alone, or that's the total value of the project, including the associated private investment.
I believe that's the total amount of the borrowing that can take place.
That's the
Hopefully,
amount of the TIF
Yeah.
borrowing that can take place. So in the example that we have on that sheet of Westford is actually going to be raising their user rates. It's not all on the TIF. They're looking at money from the State Revolving Loan Fund. They're looking at Northern Border Regional Commission, but there's a tipping point where they can say, we can raise user rates so much and we can get people on board. But after that, we're stuck at no. So if we can finance a percentage of it using tax increment financing, and then the rest of it with grants and the user rate increase, we can get this project over the finish line after 35 years of saying this is our single priority in our town and not being able to get it done. So that Senate Economic Development put the $5 million cap on, and that was to say that that's the amount of money that can be financed using TIF. And that includes both the education fund increment percentage as well as the municipal increment percentage.
All right. Well, I don't know if, to be a little parochial, I don't know if I have not seen the figures on the Middlebury project, for instance, and I would hope that whatever cap there was would allow them to do the project they're contemplating, as best I understand it so far. Because I just think of when I see big equipment showing up and concrete going in and rebar and paving and granite curbs and electricity, and just a parking lot can be a fiercely expensive thing. And being nice to know that we're giving a high enough threshold that people can take on meaningful sized projects. So, but I trust the committee to have vetted that number. I'm just inquiring.
Senator Sirotkin, can you enlighten us?
I can. It was sort of a compromise position. The agency came in with no cap. And I remember last year, Madam Chair, you made the same arguments, and they're valid in terms of appropriations and the House. And if you would put in 15 or 9 or whatever, and you multiply it by 5, we felt that was about as far as we could go on a pilot. Simple as that.
Thanks.
Can always change when reality hits.
I also thought I saw something in one of the documents that, Megan, you had said you had inquiries, and I don't know if it's just a phone call, but from 9 communities already on.
Yeah, I
Okay.
put a list in the letter that I sent the committee of some of the communities that I've either heard directly from or that others have asked me to reach out to on this, that include Middlesex, Montgomery, Fairleigh, Middlebury, St. Johnsbury has talked about this. Rockingham or Bellows Falls, I never know which namesake to use for that community. So communities all over the state, and ranging in versions of small.
Do you have dollar figures for that list?
There's a few that have done the work, but it is a lot of work to get to that point. So we don't have dollar figures for everyone as to what exactly they would be looking to this process for. I think folks are intrigued, but don't want to put so much work into something that isn't real yet.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Committee, I'm getting this up, Senator Hardy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to say that I agreed with Senator Pearson and what he said a while back. And I am scrolling through the materials. I mean, Chris, Senator Bray, you and I both heard from the town of Middlebury, and it sounds like their project would fit under the 5 million. And it is true, it's a project that the town has been trying to do for many, many, many years. And looking through there, it looks like in the materials that Megan provided, there had been a lower cap proposed at one point, and that cap was too low according to the projects that were sort of on the docket, and that 5 million would be appropriate for the projects that are kind of in this realm. And I think one of the things that I really like about the materials are, a lot of people are calling this project-based TIF. So it's like based on one single project rather than a larger area, like the bigger TIF projects. And so while maybe we don't want to do 15, I don't know if the chair's suggestion, but I don't feel comfortable with putting a population cap on it, because I think we would create a cliff unintentionally and block out some communities that we don't mean to block out. So I'd rather not do a population based criteria, because we all have different definitions of small, and we didn't even know what the population of Westford was. So who are we to figure that out? But I'm ready to vote if other people
Okay,
are.
can we amend to make this 9 projects in 5 years, knowing that if we get 27 applications that all pass muster, we can come back next year and alter that? We've outlawed TIFs, we've done TIFs, but.
And I would say,
there-
Madam Chair, I would say that, I'm sorry, Chris, if I jumped ahead of you, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, is there a number that would prevent us from having to come back next year and doing this?
We don't know. We don't know how many.
I'm joking.
Well, and it also the bill that we sent over to you actually didn't have a limit in terms of, the previous bill had 2 per year or something like that. But I guess all 9 could come in 1 year, but then you wouldn't have any for the next 4 years. But I was going to say, Madam Chair, that given that the number originated with Senator Brock, and I think it's a fair compromise that you have 2 members of economic development here, and that I think that would go through our committee without any opposition at all.
Okay.
I like the Pearson Amendment 100, the first 100 projects through.
I don't want to kill this thing.
Or kill me, please.
I just hang around the money chairs, and I know it's.
What did you suggest? 10, Madam Chair?
Well, we could do, the one suggestion was 9, but if last year's bill had 2 per year for 5 years, then we get to 10, which is another possibility. it might not kill Megan if all 10 showed up in the first year. Is that,
I would be fine with that. I don't know if Megan has any thoughts. I mean, we have to pace ourselves a little bit, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think there'll be some natural timing that happens just because VEPSI only meets so often and there's only 2 of us on staff. So there'll be some natural timing occurs, but I think 10 would be great. I would expect probably year 2 is when we'll see more applications coming in, because downtown development with all the tools that you have is still challenging in smaller communities. So being able to pull the pieces together and the players together can take time. So again, I would expect year 2 is when we'll see more of those applications coming in.
just remember, towns are getting a big slug of money this year. I don't think we know any of the details yet, but there's definitely money coming to the towns. So I'd anticipate you might see a change in the start date on this before it makes it through, if it makes it through. But I think getting it down to 2 per year. So we've got to get, I guess we don't have Becky. This has to go to a PROPS, right?
I'm not sure it does.
I believe it went to a PROPS last year because either the new worker or the remote worker program had an appropriation and was tied to this bill. That's why this bill went to appropriation. So without that piece on it, I don't have a professional opinion on that, but I don't believe it does need to go to appropriations.
I don't know that TIFs have gone there. Well, then we can have Becky draft it with the 2 per year for 10 years. And then a review. And then I think that's the only change, right?
She said there was some error that she had to fix.
Oh, yeah, no, they had,
Yeah, she did it from January 2022 to December 31st of 2007. So
it's the 5 years and it worked out as 6.
Her math was not right. So I already talked to Bloomer about that. He said we can put it on as amendment here, which is the thing we should do. Or if we sent it up to the floor, he would just go ahead and change it. So
what was the 2 a year for 10 years? Isn't that 20? 2 times 10?
Oh, 5 years, 2 year for 5 years.
Okay.
It's late. My math isn't good either.
I get it. I totally get it.
Okay. So 2 a year for 5 years, change Becky's math, which gets it to 5 years. And we will vote this out tomorrow. Does that work?
How we get it upstairs, Madam Chair?
And then, pardon?
How will we get it upstairs to have it meet the deadline?
Deadline's not till tomorrow.
Not till tomorrow. We'll email it.
But we meet in the afternoon. I was
No, it
hoping.
just has to be out of committee tomorrow. It doesn't have to be on the floor tomorrow.
Okay, as the clerk, I was moving something forward that I
Yes,
would
no.
prefer not to move forward. Yep.
And if the
Being
rules
helpful.
committee doesn't have a seizure, it can move out on Tuesday. I mean, it's not like a capital offense. They want it, they'll do it. So I think that will work, and then we'll do Commissioner Pichek tomorrow and hopefully have a short day, and maybe Faith can talk to me about next week's agenda. Senator Pearson.
So who is talking to Becky about those changes?
Becky said she'd listen, but I'll talk to her.
I also
We
wanted to-
can just, I'd be surprised if Faith hasn't already sent her an email telling her what to listen to, but we'll tell her what we decided.
I also have confirmed that S25, which is a cannabis update, is coming to us tomorrow. It was just voted out of a PROPS. So that.
So we'll
there's-
put that on the agenda for tomorrow. Okay. All right. Did we get
I
any
don't think
bills?
it's a heavy lift, but
Okay, let's hope not. Senator McDonald.
Just, Madam Chair, this afternoon, we voted out a transportation bill in your absence that was, that was in the expectation that we were trying to get it, move things along.
Yes.
But let you know in case you hadn't heard.
Okay, I saw that bill and figured it wouldn't be too controversial, and I just assumed you had voted it out.
Okay.
No one telling me. So thank you. I appreciate all the help today. Thank you. Senator Hardy, how did the insurance bill go?
We actually didn't even get to it because we had such a long debate on S30. So I'll do it tomorrow, no problem. I have the notes. I have it all set right here. I'm good to go. No worries.
Okay, we're on the floor at what time tomorrow?
11.
11 is hard for me.